Hello again, it's Jorge, and this video will be in English for the first time, but for our home country's viewers it will also be fully subtitled in Greek. And tonight we got the classics for you. Yeah, we got Twilight Struggle by GMT Games and Ananda Gupta, this diamond, which is one of the most famous and well-known games of GMT. So if you have been laughed at by your friends in the past for not having played this game and not knowing how to play it, then you've come at the right place. Tonight we're gonna teach you the best Twilight Struggle humanly possible. So this tutorial will not only be for beginner players, it will also include strategy tips for intermediate players. And after all that, we've got a surprise for you. We will be bringing my friend who is one of the best players currently playing the game in Greece, and we are going to do a very advanced level playthrough together. So stay tuned, even the advanced players. I guess you all know which of the two countries I will be playing. It is America versus Soviet Union. We are fighting the Cold War here. So let's go! So, Twilight Struggle is a card game, and it is all about controlling this map, which is the world map during the Cold War era. So one player starts here, it is the USA, the other player is here, the USSR, and over the course of the game they will be trying to expand their influence over the map. So what are we seeing on this map? We see various countries which all belong to some region. So the map is divided into regions. We've got the Europe region, which is in this color background, the blue or purple. And Europe is subdivided into two sub-regions, let's say. So we've got Eastern Europe, which is this pale purple color, and Western Europe, which is this dark purple color. So for example, we've got West Germany, which belongs to Western Europe, and East Germany, which belongs to Eastern Europe. For people familiar with history, you will understand the distinction and its historical importance. Also, we've got some countries that belong to both these sub-regions, like Austria and Finland. These two are considered to belong both to Western and to Eastern Europe at the same time, in some way. We've got some geographical adjustments made for the sake of the game, like Turkey, for example, belongs to Europe. Canada as well belongs to Europe, because for game purposes it would make no sense in creating a new region there, so it belongs to Europe. So other than Europe, we've got, this is the Middle East, these teal countries. Also we've got Asia in these orange countries, among which there are 7 countries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that while they belong to Asia, they also belong to Southeast Asia, which carries some purposes gameplay wise, more on that later. So also we've got Africa, it is this region, and the two Americas, which is South America, this dark green one, and the Central America, these light green ones. So these are the regions of the map. And among the countries, we've also got some distinctions to care. For example, these countries that have this blue part, the upper part is blue, it means they are battleground countries. Let's say that they were of increased historical importance during the Cold War. And they will be important also for the players, for USSR and for America, to take control of. The other countries are non-battlegrounds. Besides this distinction, we also have this number on the upper right part, which is, let's say, the stability number. I call this the stability number of the country. So the higher this red number or yellow number is, the more difficult it is to overthrow the country, to overthrow its regime and change its allegiance to either superpower. So for example, Angola and Zaire, these African countries have got one, so they are easier to change allegiance or coup to overthrow their regimes and the governments. While some countries like Israel, for example, have 4 as their stability number, so they are harder to coup or to place influence and gain control of. So that's pretty much the map. And the next thing we're going to talk about is the sequence of the game. So the game is played in turns, actually. It may consist of up to 10 turns, a total of 10 turns at max. So the first 3 turns, 1, 2, 3, are called the early war, which corresponds to the first years of the Cold War. Then, from 4th to 7th turn, this is the mid-war. And then 8th to 10th turn is the late war. So what does this mean? It means we've got 3 different card decks. The early war deck, look at this example. It's the early war deck and early war cards. This is the deck from which we will be drawing cards from the first 3 turns. And in the 4th turn, the mid-war deck cards will be shuffled in. And then in the 8th turn, the late war deck's cards will also be shuffled in. And we will draw accordingly. So each turn consists of action rounds. So when talking about the sequence of the game, every turn, players will alternate playing action rounds. So first action round always belongs to the Soviets, so we use this marker. And after the Soviet player completes his action round, we will flip this back. And then the US player plays his card. After that, it's action round 2 for the Soviets, action round 2 for the US, and so on. In the first 3 turns of the game, we've got 6 action rounds for each player. In the rest of the turns, we've got 7 action rounds for each players. Now, to complete the sequence of the game, I should say that there is a headline phase in which we play 1 card each, and then we play the action rounds. So, in the first 3 turns, we will start with 8 cards in hand. So, for example, we get like 8 cards in hand, and from this we will be playing one as the headline. We both reveal our headline cards accordingly, and then we will play 1 card each every action round, and typically at the end of the turn we will be left with 1 card. After we finish our action rounds, we will fill up our hand again. So, before saying anything more, we shall talk a bit more about the cards. So, the cards of the deck are divided into 3 types. These ones with the red star are the Soviet cards. More on that later. These are the US cards. And these are the common cards which both players can play for the event. So each card has its own event. The event text is down here. And apart from the event, the card also has its operations value. So when you play a card, each player may play this card either for its event or for its operations value. However, while you can play as a Soviet player, for example, you can play Nasser for the event, which is place to influence in Egypt and remove some US influence. And you can play the Indo-Pakistani war for the event, or alternatively play it for its operations value. If you want to play the other player's card, like the Marshall Plan, which is a US card, if you want to play it as the Soviet player, then you will face the consequences of the event, regardless of what you do with the card. I mean, you play it for the operations, of course, not for the event which favors the Americans. You will be playing it for the operations, and you will suffer the consequences of the event. You cannot escape the event being played. The American player will do what the event indicates, which in this case means place 7 influence in 7 different countries of Europe. All cards of the game represent important events of the Cold War, and some of them have lasting effects. Like if you play Marshall Plan as an event, you place this cute marker next to the board to indicate that Marshall Plan is in play, which allows the play of NATO later on. NATO can't be played if Marshall Plan or Warsaw Pact is not in play, so this is to help indicate that. When you play an opponent's event, as we have already mentioned, you cannot avoid the effects of the enemy event. You can, however, choose the order in which it is all applied. You can play your operations first and then have the event be resolved, or you can resolve the event first and then play your operations. For example, let's suppose the Soviet player has got 2 influence in Italy and controls the country, and he's got Marshall Plan in hand, which is a hard American event to manage. So he will use it like this. He places 2 influence in Portugal, which he can reach by this line, and also in Greece, which is adjacent as well, 2 more because it's a 4 operation value card. And after that, the American player can resolve his event, which is he can place 1 influence in 7 Western European countries that are non-USSR controlled. But right now he can't place it neither in Italy, nor in Greece, nor in Spain, and he will have to place it elsewhere, for example. So, with this said and done, we can proceed to the sequence of the game. When talking about the sequence of play, I'm not going to go over the full details of this. I will explain you the sequence in another way, because mainly the sequence consists of the following steps. Each player typically will have 8 cards in his hand at the start of the game, in game turn 1. Again, in game turns from 4 onwards, they will start with 9 cards. So, first step is that both players headline a card. The US player headlines a card, the Soviet player headlines his own, and we both reveal our cards simultaneously. So, this card must be played for its event. Whatever events is written on the card text will happen. Now, what will happen first, you ask? The card with the highest operation value is played first. So, for example, in this case, Marshall Plan will be played, and then Indo-Pakistani War. In case of a tie, the US player's event is played first. The event happens regardless of which side it favors. It is possible even for the Soviet player, for example, to play a US event during the headline phase for his own reasons, and both events will happen unless one event is unplayable for some reason. For example, if you read the Marshall Plan text, it states that it allows play of NATO. So, for example, if NATO is played during the headline phase, while Marshall Plan, for example, is not in game, then NATO can't be played, it is unplayable, and it is discarded. Talking about discarded, you see this little black star? This indicates that the event must be removed from the game after being played. So these are 2 different cases. For the events that have been played, normally we form a discard pile with events that will be reshuffled later and placed back into the deck and possibly be played again later in the game. But events like Marshall Plan, if are played for their event, then they are removed from the game because they carry this black star symbol, which means Marshall Plan as an event can be played only once per game. When it is played, it is not taken into the discard pile, it is removed from the game. So, of course, this does not mean that the US player cannot play it for operations. If the US player plays it for operation, then it is placed normally into the discard pile. But if either the US player plays it for the event or the Soviet player plays this card for operations, which means the event will be carried out, in this case it is removed from the game. So, after finishing the headline phases, both players will alternate playing action rounds. The first one will be the Soviet player, he plays a card, then the US player will play a card, and normally they will be left with one card in hand. And after the round ends, before the next round, we will be dealing cards, as many as to reach the hand limit again, which is 8 cards for the first 3 turns and 9 cards for the rest of the game. Time to talk a bit more about events and operation. What can you do with a card? There are 5 things to do with a card. Let's say we got this card, which is playable by both players. Of course, the first step will be to play it for the event. So when either player plays this card, he will perform the event. The second option is that we can play the card to place influence. Now, let's talk about placing influence. We read the card's operations value and we play that much influence. It may vary from 1 to 4. So, for example, if we play a 2 operations value card, we will place 2 influence points. So, where can you place influence points? I will use the South African example again. US player starts with 1 influence. So, he can place influence, first of all, in South Africa, because he already has influence. He can place influence here. Also, he can place influence in all the countries that are neighboring. These lines show which countries are neighboring to each other, which means from this country you can place influence here. But what you cannot do is the following. Place 1 influence here and place 1 influence here in the same action round. You cannot, because at the start of the action round you didn't have access to this one. This is termed daisy chaining, like creating a chain of influence during the same action round, and it's forbidden. You can only place influence in the countries that either you already have influence or you have access to at the start of the action round. Otherwise, you are free to split your influence points as you like. You can place in South Africa, in Botswana, in Angola, and also you can place influence in other parts of the world. Of course, there is no restriction, since you have one starting influence in Israel as the US, for example. You can place influence here, also here, and also here, for example. You can split the influence the way you want. It's barely worth noting that you can always place influence adjacent to your superpower. So, for example, you can always place influence in Mexico as the US player because it is adjacent to the USA. Otherwise, you distribute your influence as you wish. So, there's one more restriction in placing influence. Let's say that a Soviet player controls Angola. When you want to place influence in a controlled country, rather a country controlled by the opponent, you have to spend 2 influence points to place an influence. So, for example, the US player is playing nuclear test ban, which has an operations value of 4, and he wants to place influence in Angola. In that case, in order to place the first influence point, because the country is Soviet controlled, he has to spend 2 operations points rather than 1. So with the first 2 operations points, he plays this thing here, which alters the control. And then if he spends 1 more, he can place 1 more, so the total will be like 2 and the control will be flipped. So the first one costs 2 and the next influence markers will cost 1 like normally. But if, for example, the Soviet player had some influence of 2 here, then you would have to spend 2 ops points to place 1, the control still remains Soviet, and the remaining 2 operations points to place the other marker and alter the control. These are the restrictions, otherwise you can split your influence the way you like. So, depending on the red number or yellow number indicated on the upper right part, this also indicates the amount of influence either superpower must place in order to gain control of it. So, for example, if a Soviet player plays an influence in Cameroon, you use these markers. You can place as much influence as you want, or make denominations of it, like split these 2 influence marker into 1 influence markers, or whatever you want. So if you place 1 influence, you flip this, and it means you control Cameroon as the Soviet. But if the US player plays 1 influence for some reason, it will be flipped back up, so that it shows that currently both superpowers have got 1 influence in Cameroon, and nobody is in control of Cameroon. So if US plays 1 more influence, in this case we can flip those to indicate America is again in control by a ratio of 2 to 1, or you can swap this. And you've got 2 minus 1, the difference is 1, US is in control of Cameroon. Other countries are, of course, most difficult to take control of, like South Africa, for example, requires a lot of commitment, one influence, maybe even more, before you take control. Also, some countries have got some indicators. These blue or red indicators mean that some of the 2 superpowers starts with some amount of influence from the get-go into said country. For example, in South Africa, the US player starts with 1 influence from the beginning of the game. So, next option is couing a state, the coup d'etat, if you prefer. So, again, we want to alter the control of a country. Let's say, for example, the Soviet player controls Angola. We will use again our operations value of 4, or whatever it is, to overthrow the Angolan government and place a more US friendly government. We are the US players and we've got 4 operations points to spend. When couing, we target a specific country. We choose Angola and we roll a die. So we consult this number again, which is the defense of the country, or its stability number, if you prefer. The defense of the country is this number multiplied by 2. So Angola has a defense number of 2. Our attack number, if you say so, would be 4, the operations value, plus the die we rolled. So in this case it would be 4 plus 3 equals 7. The defense is 2. What does this mean? We subtract this difference, 7 minus 2. The difference is 5. With this 5, we first remove the Soviet influence of 2, and with the remaining 3 points, we place 3 influence points. So again, the procedure is the following. We determine the defense number, which is the stability number, multiplied by 2. We determine the attack number, which is our operations value plus the die we rolled. We subtract the 2 numbers, and with the difference we first remove the opponent's influence, and with the remaining difference we place our influence, as much as there is remaining. Another thing we should mention about coups is that when you coup battlegrounds, there is this beautiful track, which is the Defcon status. When you coup a battleground country, the Defcon drops. So regardless of whether this country is battleground or non-battleground, there is also another consequence, we earn some military operations points, that's how they are called. So if the US player plays a 4 operations value card to conduct a coup, he gains 4 operations points. So this military operations track will go from here to here. So now the US player has got 4 operations points. More on the importance of this track later. For now, I would like to focus on this Defcon status that we just mentioned. This track indicates kind of the tensions among the two superpowers. It starts on 5, which means peace. But during the course of the game, it will possibly drop 4, 3, 2. So when this marker drops to 1, it leads to nuclear war. The tensions among the two countries have gone too high and the nuclear war is unavoidable. In this case, the game ends. The player who loses the game is not exactly the one who triggered the nuclear war, but the phasing player, the one whose action round it is. So I'll give you an example about that. We've got this event, which is duck and cover. If the US player plays it, the event text reads, "You degrade Defcon 1 level." So in this case, the American player loses the game for playing the event. Another example, the Soviet player plays this card for operations in order to place 3 influence, for example. Again, the event is unavoidable because the Soviet player plays this card, the event will be carried out and it will drop to 1 and the Soviet player will lose the game. Or another example, again, the Soviet player plays duck and cover in order to coup Angola and flip it back to Soviet control. He conducts his coup and he drops the Defcon for conducting the coup, and then the event is carried out, so the Defcon drops to 1 and again the Soviet player loses the game. Now it's time to provide you a trickier example. So again, let's say, for purposes of the example, that the Defcon is on 2 and one of the player plays the Olympic Games. Olympic Games as an event provides the opponent with 2 options. Either participate and roll 2 dice to determine who gains some victory points, or boycott the games. Whenever the player boycotts the games, the Defcon status drops by 1 level. So if the Soviet player, for example, plays the Olympic Games for the event and the US player boycotts the games, then the Defcon drops to 1. Now, which player loses? The Soviet player, because it was his turn. He was the phasing player. It's not the US player that will lose because of boycotting the games. So you have to be careful when it is your turn and the Defcon drops for whatever reason, you lose the game. When the Defcon drops to 1 during headline, depending on which player caused it to drop to 1, this player loses the game. So for example, as we have mentioned, in headline, the card of the highest operation value takes effect first. And if the 2 cards are tied in operations value, the US event is applied first. So let's suppose, for example, that the US player has headlined this card and the Russian player has headlined this card. So the Americans have headlined duck and cover and the Soviets headline Olympic Games. First it will be duck and cover applied, which drops Defcon to 2 for the Americans. And then the Soviets have played Olympic Games, which immediately takes effect. And the Americans have the option to either participate in the Olympics for 2 victory points or boycott the Olympic Games, which drops the Defcon to 1. So in this case, because it was the Soviet player's turn for a headline, it will be the Soviet player losing the game, again despite the Americans being the ones to make the decision of dropping the Defcon status to 1. Also, it carries some other consequences, this track. So for example, when it drops from 5 to 4, it means that no more coup or realignment attempts will happen in Europe. So we place this particular marker in Europe, and this indicates that you cannot coup or realign Europe. Realignment is another form of operation which we are going to talk about shortly. Again, the Defcon status, when it drops to 3, we also place this marker to Asia. So Asia is also invulnerable to coups and to realignments. And when it drops to 2, then we place this marker on Middle East. So when Defcon is on 2, the only regions which we can coup or realign are the rest of the regions, which is Africa, South America, and Central America. Players have to be careful of when to draw Defcon because it may affect the way they play their game in certain regions. So, we have talked about coup and about placing influence. It's time to talk about realignment. Realignment, like coup, has got the purpose of kicking a player out of a country. But in this case, you are only intending to drop the other player influence, not add your own. So how does this work? Let's say the Soviet player wants to realign Angola. We count which player has got the most influence in the target country. In this case, it is the US player. And we also count which player controls adjacent countries. For example, a Soviet player might be in control of Botswana and of Zaire. Both players roll a die, and the player who has the most influence in the target country gains a +1 die modifier. Also, players who control adjacent countries gain a +1 modifier for each country they control, which is adjacent. So, for example, in this case, the US player has got a modifier of 1 because he controls Angola. No, not because he controls Angola, but because he has got more influence in Angola than the Soviet player. And the Soviet player gains a +2 modifier for the adjacent countries. But if, for example, the US player controls South Africa, then he also has got a +1 modifier, which makes it a total of +2, so both players have no modifiers. The dice are equal. After rolling the dice and after determining the modifiers, we consult the difference. So if the results were inverse. In this case, let's say that the situation is like this. The Soviet player has attempted to realign Angola because he sees that he's got a modifier of +2 and the American player has a modifier of 1. So it's a +1 for the Soviets, and they also roll a 3. So let's turn this into 4 to make it easier. And you subtract this difference from the US influence. You reduce this 3 to 1, which is again enough to control Angola, but at least you have reduced it. So you attempt realign when you see that you have chances to reduce the opponent's influence. Now, even if the difference is higher, you cannot add your own influence like you do with Coup. You just subtract and reduce the opponent's influence. Also, it carries the risk of having your own influence lost. So, for example, if the situation is like this, in this case, the US player has got +1 because he has more influence in Angola than the Soviet player, and the Soviet player has a +1, which means the dice are equal. South Africa doesn't count in this case because it is not controlled by either player. The Soviet player attempts the realign, and in this case, he rolls less than the US player. Then you subtract the difference from his own influence. So this 2 turns into 1. My point is, you can also lose your own influence by failing a realignment. you subtract the difference. So you can reduce the opponents, you can reduce your own, but you cannot add more influence. This is the difference from Coup. And also another difference is that it doesn't affect the Defcon status. The Defcon remains as it is. When realigning, the operation number, the operations value of the card you are playing to realign, is equal to the attempts, the maximum attempts that you have available. So for example, if the Soviet player plays this for realignments, he's got 3 attempts to realign. So if, for example, the first attempt to realign Angola fails, the second attempt is successful, he's got a third attempt to also try to realign South Africa or wherever on the map he can realign. Okay, so I think we should present one more example of Coup and the realignment so that you understand better the differences and the mechanics. So let's say that the situation is like this in Cuba. Our focus will be on Cuba now. So the Americans want to overthrow Cuba in some way because the Soviets have got 3 influence and the Americans have just 1 influence. So one choice would be to coup on Cuba. If they coup, let's suppose they use duck and cover. They are the Americans, so we ignore the event totally. We don't drop the Defcon status, but the Defcon status will drop to 2 because of the coup, because the Americans are coupping Cuba, which is a battleground country. Besides the Defcon status, also the military operation status will be adjusted because the Americans use the 3 operations value card to conduct a coup, so they are gaining 3 military operation points. Now, back into Cuba. They play a 3 value card. The defense of Cuba is 3 times 2, so it's 6. So the Americans as an attack points, they've got 3, their operations value, plus whatever they roll on the die. So if they roll 1, 2 or 3, nothing happens. It's 3 plus 3 equals 6, which is not enough to overthrow Cuba. So if they roll a 4, they will reduce their opponent's influence. This 3 will turn into 2. And if they roll 5, this will turn into 1 instead. And if they roll 6, it means that this 3 will totally be removed. In this case, it's just Soviet influence removed, not American influence added. But suppose we've got a card that boosts our action. So suppose we have Latin American death squads, which boosts our coup power by 1. So again, it's this situation and the Americans are coupping. They roll a 6, they use the 3 value card. So they got 3 plus 6 equals 9. So 9 minus 6 makes 3. But they've got a plus 1 on their coup because Latin American death squads is in effect. In that case, not only will they be removing the Soviet influence, but they will add 1 influence of their own for the difference remaining. So that's all you have to know about Coup. At first you remove the opponent's influence, and if there is more difference to be subtracted, then you add your own influence. Now, let's say they are willing to realign instead. Again, they're using their duck and cover card, which has got a value of 3. So they've got 3 attempts to change the balance of power in Cuba. Now, the faction that has got the more influence, rather the side that has got the more influence in Cuba, in the target country, is the Soviets, more than the US. So they've got a modifier of +1, and the Americans have got a +1 because they've got an adjacent superpower. I will modify the example a little bit. So the Soviets have got more influence here. The Americans have got a +1 because they have their superpower adjacent to the target country. and they've got a +1 because they control Nicaragua. So in this case, the Americans have got a +2 and the Soviets got a +1. So in total, the Americans have got a die roll which is slightly better by 1. So in each attempt, both players roll a die. If the Soviet player rolls 1 more than the American player, we are even, because the Americans have got the +1 as we just mentioned. So nothing happens. If the Soviets roll 2 more than the US player, or 3 more, or even more, then the Americans lose influence. So the difference is that when attempting a realignment, you are also risking losing some of your own influence if the rolls are too bad. Another difference is that the Defcon is not dropped, so you can do it even if the Defcon is at 2, and you're not gaining military operation points. And okay, let's give some more examples. If the American player rolls equal to the Soviet player, because he's got the +1 modifier, the Soviet player will lose 1 influence. If the American player rolls on his next attempt, for example, 1 more than the Soviet player, plus their 1-2 modifier, makes a difference of 2. So 2 influence is subtracted. Even if it was a higher difference, you are not adding your own influence during realignment. The goal is to reduce your opponent's influence, but you're risking reducing your own influence as well if the die roll goes too bad. That's all there is to know. Okay, so as I have mentioned earlier, we've got 5 ways to play a card. First one is, of course, to play its event. The second one is to place influence with it. Third one would be to coup a country with it. The fourth one would be to realign a country or multiple countries. And the fifth one is throwing it onto the space. So this is the space racetrack. Space was important during the Cold War, of course, for reasons of prestige and technology. Both superpowers were in an arms race against each other to reach further into the space. So, what can we see in this space racetrack? We've got the 2 competing companies, NASA and Intercosmos for the Soviets. Once each turn, you can discard a card from your hand into the space for space race. You can only do this once per turn, so when you do, you will flip this marker to indicate space race card played for this turn. You can attempt again next turn. Let's say, for example, that the Soviet player is carrying Duck and Cover, this troublesome card that drops the Defcon and possibly leads to nuclear war. This is a dangerous card. The Soviet player discards it into the space because in this case, this is the only case when the event is not carried out. This is the only way that you get rid of the opponent's event. You just play this card into the space. But the prerequisite is that the card is of 2 operations value or higher. You cannot discard the 1 ops value card into the space. So you play this card, you discard it, and then you roll a die. In this case, in order to reach the first step, which is like the Earth satellite, you have to roll 1, 2, 3. With 1, 2, 3, you are successful, and your marker goes up by 1 step, and you gain a number of victory points or VPs. The first player who reaches this step earns 2 points. The second player will earn 1 point. If he comes to par, then he gets the lower reward. That's a nice way to talk about VPs as well. It's time that we talk about victory points. We've got this track right here, which maintains record of the victory points of the 2 players. So it starts on 0 and it can go either way. If the USSR player earns victory points, it goes towards here. If the US player earns victory points, for example, then from here it will come back to here and then proceed towards the US side. So whenever the US player earns 20 victory points, or whenever the Soviet player earns 20 victory points, the game ends, and this side is the winner. This is one of the ways of ending the game. The other way, as we have mentioned earlier, is the Defcon status dropping to 1. And by the way, another way for the game to end would be if it takes us to turn 10, and after 10-10, after all cards are being played, there is a final scoring, which we are going to talk about more in detail later. So back onto the space race track. After this step, the numbers might differ a bit. Again, you have to discard a 2 ops or higher card for the next step, but you have to roll a 1 to 4, so you have to take into account that chances are slightly better for this step. And a player who reaches this step may play 2 space race cards per turn. So if he is here at this point and he throws a card to the space and he is successful, he goes here. We flip this back onto the space race card played side, but now he can play a second card into the space. So you can try again, and whether we are successful or not, we place this marker which says second card played. You can play a maximum of 2 cards, but if the other player comes even with you, then one player's effect cancels the other's one, which means neither player can play 2 space race cards per turn anymore. After that, in the third steps, we have to again roll 1, 2, 3 with a card of 2 ops or more. First player earns 2 victory points. The second player to reach this step earns nothing. In this step, we get a major benefit that the opponent chooses and shows his headline card first. So we see which card he headlines and we react accordingly, which is a major advantage. Again, if the other player reaches this step as well, then both players cancel each other and nobody has this advantage. From here onwards, we have to discard a 3 ops value card, so an ops value of 2 is not sufficient anymore. First player earns 3 victory points, the second player earns 1 victory point, and then in this step we may discard 1 held card. So typically, as I mentioned earlier, we will finish our turns with 1 card in our hand, possibly the most troublesome card that we can't get rid of in any way possible. By the way, it's not possible that you pass in this game unless you have no cards in hand. If you have a card, you have to play it. So for example, again, if the Soviet player is holding duck and cover and he has no way to discard it, he must play it and possibly lose the game for it. So this space race step allows you to discard the 1 held card, the one that you held at the end of the action rounds. And then we've got this step, which means 4 points for the first player to reach it, 2 points for the second player, and in the extremely rare occasion that some player reaches this step, earns 2 victory points, and he can take 8 action rounds instead of the usual 7. So that's the space race. So it's time to talk about scoring cards. This is the main way of accumulating victory points. Inside the deck, there are some scoring cards. I've brought you here the scoring cards of the early war. In the early war deck, there is Middle East scoring, Asia scoring, and Europe scoring. So naturally, the focus of the players during the first 3 turns in the early war will be these 3 regions. So for example, in this region of Asia, they will be trying to score high. When this card comes out of the deck, it may not be held. You cannot hold it in your hand. You have to play it in one of your action rounds this turn. Also, you cannot space race it, of course, because it has a 0 ops value. These are the only cards that have a 0 ops value. You can't play it for operations. You just have to play the event. Now, that being said, to be honest, there are some indirect ways of getting rid of the scoring card. For example, let's say it's the turn of the Soviet player and he doesn't want to play the Asian scoring because his scoring is really poor on the Asia region. So his last 2 cards in hand are these 2. In this case, he will event 5-year plan. He will play it for operations. Since he's the Soviet player, he will do 3 operations and then the event will be carried out, which indicates that one random card in the Soviet hand will be discarded without event, okay, unless it is a US event. So in this case, the only card left in his hand would be Asia scoring. And thanks to the event for the Soviet player, this card will be discarded without event. These are some indirect ways to get rid of the scoring cards, but otherwise you are forced to play them. So again, you have to be prepared for the scorings to come and you have to have placed your influence in the region. Now, how do scorings work? As you can see, both on the scoring card and on the region's scoring indicator, you score points depending on your presence, domination, or control levels. Also, you score 1 point per controlled battleground country in region, and 1 point per country adjacent to the enemy superpower that you control. So what does this mean? Let's go back to the Asia example again. Asia is a region that has various battlegrounds, 6 in total. It is Pakistan, it is India, it is Thailand, it is Japan, South Korea, and North Korea. These are the countries of the heaviest conflict amongst the 2 superpowers. First of all, each player being in control of these countries will earn 1 victory point for its battleground. So let's suppose the situation is like this. And let's suppose, for the sake of this example, that neither country is in control of the other battleground countries. So in this case, the Soviet player will score 2 victory points for Pakistan and Thailand when the scoring is played. The US player will score 1 victory point for India. This influence does not count because this does not result in control of the countries, since South Korea requires 3 and Japan requires 4 influence. So it's a 2-1 for the Soviets, and the victory point marker would go down by 1 step for the Soviets, in favor of the Soviets. So we calculate the net effect of the scoring and we move the VP marker once accordingly. Now, back to the example. When the scoring card comes, if a superpower has control of at least 1 country, battleground or not, it is sufficient to gain presence. So, for example, if the US player has got control of Vietnam and only Vietnam, which is a non-battleground country, they have secured their presence in Asia. However, if they only had influence but not control of a country, then they have no presence. So, in this case, the Soviet player would score 3 points for being present, while the US player is not, plus 2 points for the battleground countries. A total of 5 victory points for the Soviets. Next, we've got to talk about domination. What does domination mean? It means controlling more battleground countries than your opponent does, while also controlling at least 1 non-battleground country and a total of more countries than your opponent in this region. So what does this mean again? The Soviet player controls Pakistan and Thailand, but this itself is not sufficient to gain domination, because in order to gain domination, he has to also control a non-battleground country, in this case Laos, Cambodia. Now he has domination, because he controls more battleground countries than the US player, plus he is controlling a non-battleground country. But again, if the US player had control over these three countries, the total number of countries controlled is equal. Both players control three countries. So in this case, we get no domination. Both players have presence, which results in 3 victory points. The Soviet player will earn 2 additional victory points for their battlegrounds, and that's all. In order to get domination, you have to fulfill all these conditions. Control more battleground countries than your opponent, control at least one non-battleground country, and at least one more country total than your opponent does. This is domination. Also, we've got to talk about control, which means controlling all of the battleground countries of this region. So in our case, in the Asian example, a player would have to control all of the following countries: Pakistan, India, and Thailand, and Japan, and South Korea, and North Korea. But again, in this case, if the other player controls an equal number of countries, be it battlegrounds or not, we have no control, we have just presence. So in our case, let's suppose the Soviet player controls Pakistan, Thailand, and also India, and also, for the sake of our example, which is highly unlikely, he controls Japan, he controls South Korea and North Korea. Now he's got these 6 battlegrounds plus 1 non-battleground country, which is Cambodia. Normally this would mean control, which would mean 9 victory points because of the control, plus 6 more victory points for the battleground countries, a total of 15. But if the US player controls 7 other countries, for example, these 7 countries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're tied, so we've got presence, no control. And the Soviet player would just get 6 victory points for the controlled battlegrounds. So, recapping, in order to have control of a region, we have to control all battlegrounds plus at least 1 more country total than your opponent. It doesn't matter whether it is a total of battleground countries or not, you just have to control a total of more countries than your opponent, plus controlling all battlegrounds. And finally, for the sake of victory points, we've got to count the countries adjacent to the enemy superpower. So for example, in Asia, there is Afghanistan, which, if controlled by the US player, is adjacent to the Soviet Union. So this country would give plus 1 victory point for the US player, regardless of the other victory point rewards. And in this case, Japan is also considered adjacent to USA, which could give plus 1 victory point to the Soviet player. And also North Korea, as you can see by these lines, is adjacent to Soviet Union, so if the US player controls North Korea, he earns 1 victory point. You can always consult these black lines. So there is no chance that you've got both presence and domination or control. Always your scoring is at one of these 3 levels. You are either present or dominating or controlling the region. So for example, if the US player is present and the Soviet player is dominating, the Soviet player will earn 4 victory points, which is 7 for the domination minus the 3 for the US presence, plus all the other victory point rewards for the battleground countries and possible adjacent to enemy superpower countries. And that's a main way of accumulating victory points and for winning the game. And it's one of the main ways of winning the game. I also have to mention, now is the right time to do so, that if the game ends after the 10th turn and after all cards have been played, after all action rounds have been completed, we conduct a final scoring, which is we score all the possible regions of the world. Like, again, Asia, Europe, Middle East, Africa, South America, and Central America. So at the end of the game, both superpowers have to be quite spread around the map so that they have established domination or ideally control over certain regions in order to gain their victory points for the final scoring. Now I also have to mention that in the mid-war deck there is also this scoring, the Southeast Asia one, which is a one-off, unlike all the other scorings, which are reshuffled into the deck upon being played. The Southeast Asia scoring is played only once and then it goes off the deck. And it works differently. You have Thailand, which is of highlighted importance. It provides 2 victory points to its controller, and all the other Southeast Asian countries, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines, each provide 1 victory point reward to the superpower controlling it. Now we can recap which is the goal of the game and how the game ends. The one way is to reach the 20 victory points marker. The other way is final scoring, or by having your opponent provoking the nuclear war. And I will conclude by saying that for Europe there is a special reward for the player controlling all the battleground countries of Europe. Control would mean instantly win the game, regardless of the other game conditions. And there is also one last way of ending the game, and this is this late war deck card, which may come out from turn 8 onwards, which is War Games, and its event text reads, while the Defcon is at 2, you can play this, you can give 6 victory points to your opponent, then the player with most victory points wins the game. That's all. Okay, so summarizing the sequence of play. When the turn starts, we have to increase Defcon status by 1 level. So typically the Defcon status would have dropped down to 2, for example, because of the players conducting coup attempts. So each turn it is raised up by 1 step, and in this case we remove the correspondent markers for Middle East or Asia or whichever region is protected by coups and realignments, so that it can be dropped again. Then we deal cards to reach our hand limit again. We've got the headline phase and the action rounds, which we have already talked about. And then we've got the check military operation status step. Now this is the time that we are concerned about this track. So typically both superpowers start at 0, and by conducting coup attempts they earn military operations status. As we've mentioned earlier, you can attempt to coup countries, be it battlegrounds or not, and if they are battleground countries, the Defcon drops. But regardless whether they are battleground countries or not, you gain military ops depending on your operations value. So if you coup a country with an operations value of 4, like this card, then the player who conducted this coup earns 4 military operations points. So after concluding our action rounds, we check whether we have fulfilled our required military operations requirement. The required military operations is the Defcon status level. So if the turn ends and the Defcon status is at 3, for example, it means that you have to have conducted at least 3 military operations. The US player has conducted 4 in this case, and the USSR player has conducted 0 military operations. So the USSR player will suffer a penalty of 3 victory points, which is the Defcon status, the military operations that he accumulated. So, if the US player, for example, had conducted only one military operation and the Defcon status finishes at 3, so both players have to suffer a penalty. The US player will suffer a penalty of 2 and the USSR player will suffer a penalty of 3. So in this case, it's just the USSR player suffering a 1 victory point penalty. After this step, we've got the reveal held card, which is for tournaments only, and it consists of this step, which means I'm showing my hand that I have not held scoring cards, because as we have said earlier, you are not allowed to keep the scoring cards in hand. So after going over this step, we've got to flip the China card, and that's the time to talk about China. China's role is abstracted through the use of China card, and you don't need to look at this spot. It is for the Chinese Civil War variant only. We will not be playing this variant, we play the normal game, so don't mind that. So our focus is on the China card. This is a special card which first of all does not count towards your hand limit. It starts on the Soviet player's side. So the Soviet player at turn 1 has got not only his 8 cards, but also the China card in his hand and available. This card cannot be discarded in the way of played events that require you to discard cards, and it has no event actually. It's played only for operations, be it placing operation or queuing or realigning, and of course it cannot be thrown into the space. First of all, it offers a kind of flexibility in your hand. If you have got very bad cards, you can play China and avoid playing the 1 cards that you don't want to play at all. And it's got a bonus condition that if all the operations points are spent in Asia, it's got +1 in addition to its usual 4 operations value. So let's say that, for example, the Soviet player is in control of Thailand and the American player is in Vietnam, while most experienced players will understand that usually it is the reversed case, Soviet players being in control of Vietnam, but it's funny nonetheless. So the US player wants to play the China card to place influence. He has access to Thailand, which requires 2 influence points to control. The US player plays the China card and it's got 4 operations value +1 because all the influence points will be spent in Asia. So he plays 1 influence point which costs 2 operations because the country is controlled by the Soviet. So he plays the first influence point by spending 2 operations value, and then he plays 3 more, which takes him to 3 + 1, 4, which means control switches to the US player. Now, when a player plays the China card, it is passed to their opponent, but it is passed face down. It is unavailable for the rest of the turn, and after finishing our action rounds, we go back to this step, lettered G, which means the China card is flipped back again, available for the next round. Then we advance the turn marker, and if it was the final round, we conduct the final scoring. So 2 more things to know about the China card. At some points in the game, there might be some rare cases where one player has discarded all his cards and he still has got to play. If the China card is the only card remaining in his hand, he's never forced to play the China card. If it is his turn, he may just pass. It's one of the few cases that you can pass even though you have a card available to play. And one more thing that I would like you to know is that as we mentioned, the China card has got an operation value of 4, but if all points are spent in Asia, it goes up to 5. What do we mean by that? If we, for example, place all of our influence in Asia, like we're in Vietnam, we can place influence in Thailand, we place one influence which has got a cost of 2 because the American is temporarily controlling the country. So now I have spent 2 operation points, I've got 3 remaining, so I place 3 more, and this equals to 4, which means we control the country. In this case, we have spent all of our influence in Asia. Another example is if we, for example, try to coup an Asian country. And the last example would be if we attempted some realignments, and all of our realignments attempts, a total of 5, would be in Asia. That's the game for you guys, and with that said, we have covered the rules section. If anybody would like to ask questions, I will gladly answer in the comments, of course. And with this said and done, we are ready to dive into the more intermediate level stuff.